I want you to think about Jesus and what he was doing as he entered Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. And then I want you to think about who you are in this version, Luke's version, Luke 19:28-40, of the story. Are you like the crowd looking on? Are you like the disciples, throwing your clothes on the ground and hailing Jesus as King? Are you like the Pharisees, concerned about the lack of discipline and the Roman reaction? As the federal election here in Australia approaches and we are presented with lots of different models of leadership and authority, it's good to be gathered on Palm Sunday as we see Jesus' model of kingship presented. Whatever their feelings about themselves, politicians have to push themselves forward as the best choice, the greatest one who will solve your problems. In modern Australian society, that usually means who will deliver the most economic benefits, firstly for me, and secondly for the country. Jesus offers a very different model of leadership. His greatest signal on the day about what he might have been doing was to come riding on a donkey. The second clue is in his response to the Pharisees, and a third can be found in the context of this passage. Way back in chapter 9, Jesus is hailed as the King by Peter. Then, in the story of the Transfiguration, God's voice from heaven booms that Jesus is my beloved Son. And at the end of the chapter, Jesus begins the journey, sets his face towards Jerusalem, towards his death, his arrest, trial, and execution. Just before he begins that final approach, in the passage in Luke, just before today's reading, he tells a story about a king who, although he is delayed, is coming to claim royal power. He tells this story because he was near Jerusalem and because they supposed that the kingdom of God was about to appear immediately. That's chapter 9, verse 11. At this point, Jesus could have chosen to do a couple of things. If he wanted to deny he was a king, he would simply have kept walking into Jerusalem. If he had been coming to claim immediate power, he would have come on a horse, perhaps with some kind of armed group behind him. Instead, he chooses a donkey. A donkey is a sign of peace and a sign of kingship. There's a famous Old Testament passage about the king when he comes. The Message translation puts it like this: "Shout and cheer, daughter Zion. Raise the roof, daughter Jerusalem. Your king is coming, a good king who makes all things right, a humble king riding on a donkey, a mere colt of a donkey. I've had it with war. No more chariots in Ephraim, no more horses in Jerusalem, no more swords and spears, bows and arrows. We will offer peace to the nations, a peaceful rule worldwide from the four winds to the seven seas." That's Zechariah chapter 9, verses 9 to 10. For the people of Jerusalem's time, this would have been an unmistakable sign. He's saying he's the king. He's riding a donkey, just like the prophet said. That might have been the words or thoughts rippling through the crowd. Indeed, Jesus doesn't deny it. For when the Pharisees begged Jesus to quieten down his disciples, he refuses and claimed that even the stones, the elements of creation, would hail him as king if the disciples did not. But Jesus wasn't going to be a king or leader like Herod or Caesar or our Prime Minister Scott Morrison or our opposition leader Anthony Albanese or one of the minority party leaders like Clive Palmer or Pauline Hanson. And he wasn't even going to be a great general like David. He was going to be a peacemaker who makes all things right, who isn't only for the Jewish people, but for all the world, including the Romans, including Herod, including Caesar, including Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese, Clive Palmer, and even Pauline Hanson. And, of course, he was going to be the leader for you and for me. He is choosing the way of the cross, humiliation and obedience. You can follow where Jesus leads, but you can never take his place. Only he can bridge the gap between us and the one he called Father. Like others in this story, you and I are looking on as this king goes by or following on behind. You can take their place in the story. So are you part of the crowd? In this version of the story, Luke's version, the crowd are in the background. The Pharisees are standing in the crowd and others are there too, all on the way to the Passover festival. Through the middle of you comes this procession, a man on a donkey. A great crowd of disciples follows on. Do you join the parade and cheering Jesus as king? Do you join the disciples? Do you keep silent, not cheering, but following to see what will happen? Do you just dismiss him as another would-be leader making a noise? A Neville Warburton, a Bill Shorten or a John Hewson, all opposition leaders in Australia who will soon disappear into the footnotes of history. Does the parade just go by? Or are you part of the great multitude of disciples following Jesus with the 12 all the way from Galilee in the north of the country? Or perhaps because you've joined more recently. Along the way, you've seen the sick healed, the demon-possessed and mentally unwell have been brought back to their right minds. You've heard Jesus speaking words to make your heart sing, words about the poor and the broken and the imprisoned being restored, words about the kingdom of God being near and even among them. You've watched him eat with sinners and seen him touch the lepers, and now he rides a donkey, just as the prophet said. He must be the king. The dawning of the kingdom of God you've already seen in the deeds of power, together with this symbolic act, must mean that the kingdom of God is about to come in all its fullness. Jesus will sit on the throne and Caesar will be humbled. Do you hail him as king? Is there any doubt in your mind? Do you see a hint of any shadow of the cross? Will you be like virtually all the male disciples? Will you run away when he is arrested or deny him at his trial? Will you betray him as Judas does with a kiss? Or are you like the Pharisees? Perhaps you think Jesus is a fraud, but perhaps there's a longing in your heart, a hope that Jesus might be the king. But you know the Romans. You know the temple officials. Someone claiming to be a king as Jesus was better have a whole army behind him, be it an army of men or of angels. For without such an army, they will be crushed. The best they will do is cause trouble, stir up the Romans to draw their swords. All this cheering and shouting will end in tears and bloodshed by the sword of those Gentiles, those unclean Roman overlords. The festival, and perhaps even the temple, if Jesus causes trouble there, will be defiled. You cannot let this happen. As the crowd cheers for Jesus, your heart sinks. The nation is at risk because of this foolishness. Are you a Pharisee, longing to preserve what is and hoping for a return to a glorious past vision of David slaying Goliath, beating the Philistines and taking the throne to rule forever? Who are you? Part of the crowd deciding to follow? Looking on with interest or turning away from the one proclaimed as king? Are you the disciples, recognizing Jesus as the promised king and yet not really understanding him? Wherever you are is not necessarily wrong. The Pharisees were right in their fears for Jesus and the Jewish nation. In 5 days, the power of Rome had nailed this king of the Jews to the cross. And less than a generation later, the might of Rome destroyed the whole city of Jerusalem, including the temple, the place where Jewish people believed that God was most present on earth. The disciples were right to hail Jesus as king. He was and is the King of kings and the Lord of lords, and his kingdom shall have no end. Just 7 days after this parade, Caesar still sits on the throne. But the greatest enemy of all, death, has been defeated, has lost its victory and its sting, for Jesus has been raised, And through the Spirit, even now, he shares that new life with us and promises it to us for eternity. And it's okay to be part of the crowd looking on. It's where we all start. It's where any new or startling thing will often be the place where we find ourselves looking on in a crowd, wondering what to make of it. The real question is, will you keep looking on? Will you turn away? Or will you join the parade with the great crowd of disciples and hail Jesus as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords? Will your lives reflect that humble mission? Will you preach his peace, his reconciliation with your vote, with your friendships, in your families, in your workplaces, in the community groups and associations that you're part of, and in the schools? Will you preach his peace on the golf courses and in the boardrooms? Will you proclaim that he is King? Will you live out our congregation's vision and be an active expression of God's love? Will you join the parade, or will you stay on the sidelines? Amen.